We had just a few technical difficulties starting, but we are ready to start. So with us today is Anita Archer, and she's going to be presenting on the book by Dylan Wiliam. I'm Nick, I'm the host. If you guys have any technical difficulties, you can send me a chat or a Q&A, and I'll try to help you the best I can. We also record these webinars, and we'll send them out after, in case you have to go and you can't catch it all. We usually open it up for questions at the end, and again, you'll use the chat function or the Q&A function to submit your question. But feel free to submit your questions as Anita goes on, and I usually, when I wrap up, we'll go over them all. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anita.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving us a few more minutes. I just had to switch to a different computer. You know, every year for the TOT webinars, I pick one book that I think would be useful to add to our library supporting our study of explicit instruction. And this summer, I had a gentleman in Pennsylvania who said, I'm really enjoying this book. I think you should read it. And sure enough, have read the previous books by Dylan Wiliam, and this one, Creating the Schools Our Children Need, was a must-read. And so today, I'm going to sort of give you a book review, but also put it through the lens of explicit instruction. So there is the book, Creating the Schools Our Children Need, and it really has two parts. Why what we are doing now won't help much. And then the more important part, I'm going to emphasize what we can do instead that would make a difference. So there's two very meaningful segments of this book. And so here are sort of the intentions of this webinar. I want to introduce you to the book by Dylan Wiliam and hope you might add it to your professional library. But also, I think it would be a very good study, particularly the first half would be great for administrators, and the second half would be very great for teachers, coaches, in terms of what to do. So I'm also going to put it in context of explicit instruction because, of course, it fits very well. So starting out, the first part of the book looks at so many things that school districts have looked at to see if they would make a difference. You know, every time I get on a plane and I'm sitting down and someone is watching what I'm reading and they'll say, so you're an educator. Why aren't we doing what Singapore does? Why don't we do what Finland does? Why don't we have small schools within our high schools? And so all of these initiatives people are asking me questions about. Well, now I have a source. I have this book, which for those kind of questions, he has done beautiful reviews of logical reviews, but also with the right kind of evidence so you can follow it up. And basically asks the question for those type of innovations, is it feasible to do? Very importantly, is it effective? And is it cost efficient? Are there other things that we could do that would cost less and make more difference? And in the end, what is the evidence? What is the evidence to support that? Now, I'm going to do this briefly, hoping that you will get this maybe even an excellent book to read over the Labor Day weekend. So let's just look at some of the things that schools say, oh, let's try this. So let's try teaching students using their preferred learning styles. Maybe they're a visual learner, an auditory learner, a kinesthetic learner. Now, I'm added quotes here. I'm not going to read them all to you, but so you could find them, locate them in the book, and then read supporting information. So we've asked this question. Should we figure out students' preferred learning style and teach them the visual group, the auditory, the kinesthetic? So there was a major review of all the studies in this area that did some kind of diagnosis to find out if the kids were visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, and then to see if they did better if they had instruction in their preferred modality. And basically what they found was this. Put bluntly, there is no good evidence that teaching students in their preferred learning styles has any benefits at all. So we have put a lot of energy into something that simply doesn't make any difference. Well, how about let's have a big high school. Let's put it into smaller high schools. And so the Gates Foundation and other groups certainly supported that. But looking at the evidence, particularly when it's a large high school, and now it goes into smaller ones, I'm just going to read this one to you. In fact, there is a slight tendency for larger schools to be more effective than smaller schools because with more teachers of each subject, teachers can specialize. So something that sounds great and might be good for other reasons, but in terms of achievement, didn't make the mark. Well, let's try paying good teachers more. Well, it turns out the answer may be yes, provided we pay all teachers more. Provided we pay all teachers more, so that over time, the teachers' salaries would be more congruent with those of engineers or doctors or other parallel graduates. The esteem of teaching might rise. The quality of people who say, well, that's the career for me, might increase. And then we might have some academic gains. But that's a great chapter to read because of, is it feasible, is it effective, and is it efficient? Questions? Well, let's try reducing class size. Now, class size reduction does make a difference, particularly if it is in kindergarten and first and second grade. But the benefits were small and the costs very high. But when it was done in large areas where they had recruitment of teacher challenges already, it actually had some negative impact because they lowered the class size, had to hire more teachers, but many teachers who did not have the same experience and qualifications, and the quantity and quality of instruction went down. So that's a great chapter to read, both for the logical arguments, but also for the evidence. Maybe we should do what Singapore is doing, Finland's doing. And, you know, I really enjoyed this chapter because, as he said in this chapter, what appears to be successful in one country simply might not be successful in another. And we have to look kind of deeply. Who were they testing? Who were they looking at? Because some countries have different ways of selecting the students that are tested. So that chapter is one to definitely look at. Maybe we should expand school choice, charter schools, and vouchers. And, you know, in the end, it is going to be the quality of instruction on a consistent basis given in a public school, a private school, a charter school, a school receiving vouchers. And I kind of chuckled when I read this. Advocating expanding school choice as a way of increasing student achievement in the United States is the educational equivalent of arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Yes, it makes things better, but not much. And there are other things we can do that will have a much greater impact on how much our children learn. For example, the quality of instruction in the classes, the amount of instruction that students receive, the explicitness of that instruction. So it doesn't, if I'm going to do a charter school, I still have to have the highest quality of instruction available. So you can see you're getting excited about reading these chapters as I did. And sort of doing little summaries. And so if someone says on the plate, so what do you think about charter schools? I can say, well, you know, it's not so much the school, but what happens in the classroom that makes a significant difference. Well, let's try, and here's some other chapters. Let's try getting smarter people into teaching, or firing bad teachers, or using computers in the classroom, or lifting children out of poverty. All of those have been suggested, and we have to ask, is it feasible? Is it effective? Is it cost efficient? And what is the evidence? And that is the gift of this book, because of the very thorough, both logical and evidence-based reviews. So get to read those chapters. But I have to tell you, it was the second half of the book that really was inspiring to me. And one of the things that caught me was the fact that we're always looking for something that would be easy to do, that would be, sounds really great. And I keep coming back after 51 years again and again to it's the quality of instruction. All of those variables of explicit instruction that we center on. Does the teacher have an objective? Does the teacher teach information in a clear sequence? Does the teacher actively involve the students? Does the teacher do, I do it, we do it, you do it? Does the teacher have demonstration? Does the teacher constantly have formative assessment embedded? To me, that is what I see in classes that makes a difference in terms of student learning. And that is very similar to the view of Dylan Wiliam. So the reality is that there is now a great deal of well-organized evidence that shows that there are things that every school district should be doing that have worked in a lot of districts, rural, suburban, urban, and your district, and that have worked with different state standards. Unfortunately, while these ideas are familiar, old hat even, they're not being implemented consistently in our schools. We need to stop looking for the next big thing and instead focus on doing the last big thing properly. The evidence about what we should be doing is pretty clear. We know what we should be doing, we're just not doing it. Thus we have this knowing and doing gap. And so what should we be doing? Well, he focuses on two things when he looks at what we should do instead. Something that's feasible, effective, cost efficient, and has evidence. So that's what we're going to use our time on because it will fit right into the perspective we have on explicit instruction. So what to do? And so he put it into two big ideas. And the first one is ensuring a knowledge-rich curriculum. A knowledge-rich curriculum where students are learning in knowledge in reading and in math and in science and in social studies and in health, that they are gaining knowledge in permanent memory. They are learning, a focus on learning. And the teachers, the first-year teachers, the 10-year teachers, the 20-year teachers in terms of their experience, all are required to look at their outcomes in their classroom and constantly upgrade their teaching behaviors. And now, a very simple summary of what makes a difference. So we're going to explore both of these. It was, as I looked at it from a different lens, it seemed exactly what I see in schools. That the schools that have chosen to have very good curriculum and to implement them with fidelity and constantly looking at are the students learning and then asking what can I do as a teacher that would increase learning. So excellent in terms of that vision. So let us look at that. And starting with ensuring a knowledge-rich curriculum. And first, we're going to take a moment and look at what our brains, how they work in terms of three concepts: short-term memory, long-term memory, and cognitive overload. So you hear my printer. Forgive me. I am in my assistant's office because his computer worked today and mine didn't, and there's something coming in. Let's see if I can just figure out a way to stop it. Okay, we'll just let it be. This part of this book is the best review I've had, that I've read, on short-term memory, long-term memory, and the concept of cognitive overload. So this is a little piece that is kind of a must-read for us. So you know much of this, but let's just get it all back with a little spaced review. So we all know about short-term working memory and long-term memory. And we know that our short-term memory is limited. I see that every day in my own life in terms of both capacity and duration. Capacity. Now, we've often heard, well, our short-term memory, our working memory can only hold 7 things. But some more recent research said, well, it might be even a little bit more limited, maybe only 5 items that it's able to manipulate at one time, because all of our thinking, all of our planning is done in working memory. And then the other part is the duration. What is in working memory simply doesn't stay very long. And we have evidence of this all the time. You write down a telephone number and you have it for 5 minutes, but then it's gone because it has not had enough practice to become a part of long-term memory. Then we have also research that have tried to improve short-term memory. And as Dylan Wiliam's review shows, we've not had much luck with that. So what can we do? We have limited short-term memory, and our efforts to improve it have not been very fruitful. Well, here's some things we can do to help in terms of short-term memory. And one is breaking things down into chunks, not individual items, but chunks, so that they could be easily memorized and moved into long-term memory. Another thing that helps short-term memory is associating the contents with what is already in long-term memory. And so read that last quote with me. The important point here is that the power of short-term memory is increased massively by relying on the contents of long-term memory. Now let me just give you an example that happened just a few days ago. So I have been happily on the road for months this summer, doing TOTs on explicit instruction and other trainings. I came home to learn that my washer was no longer working. The agitation or something was not working. Okay, and so Jonathan, my assistant, had a repair person come in. Now, we had looked in there, we had looked at inside the washing machine, we had a book out, we had, at least I did, I had no idea of what to do, none whatsoever. So in walks this technician from his company, actually he is the president of the company. He walked over, he turned one knob on, and he said, this must be broken. This is not working. And everything that he had in long-term memory allowed him to solve the problem that I would never have been able to solve. And I just sat there and thinking, having just reread this section, there's another great example that we need knowledge. We need knowledge and background knowledge to support the problem solving that we're doing. That the more knowledge that we have in long-term memory, the better problem solver we are. And that is totally confirmed with the research in this text. And so, reading the first one with me, what is stored in long-term memory is crucial for the effective use of short-term memory. The more children have in their long-term memories, the less important the capacity of short-term memory becomes. The more the technician knew about my washing machine, which he just went on and on, then he started explaining it to me, and I didn't even have enough knowledge to sort through what he was saying. The more it will support it. Now, you see that as teachers, that as you get more experience and an event happens in your classroom, and you immediately say to yourself, I need to go back and I need to do this. Based on what I've had done in the past, this would be the best thing for me to do at this moment. This behavioral problem, here's what I should do. The more knowledge you have and background knowledge, the better problem solving you are. And so he summarizes it this way. That's why a major goal of education is to equip children with knowledge, rich stores in long-term memory. which is in turn why a knowledge-rich curriculum is essential. Now, I had an event this spring when I was actually in Australia, and I was doing a demonstration lesson, and the students were reading about the Panama Canal. Now, middle school kids, and is it possible that they don't even know where Panama is? Maybe not even Central America, that they may not even know what the Panama Canal is and what a lock is. That knowledge is necessary if they were going to comprehend the article we were going to read about the Panama Canal. This again and again I see this. Facts are important. But what is more important is how facts fit together. Facts are important, but what is more important is how facts fit together. So let's just look at an example of that. So often in my trainings, I've used an example lesson about our legislative branch of the federal government. And see, here are some of these facts. And we're in such a political world now, so all of you know this from our own experience. So that the legislative branch is often called Congress. The legislative branch makes laws and determines the federal budget. That there is the House of Representatives, lower chamber. The Senate is often referred to as the higher chamber. And the representatives come from all states based on population. Washington State has 10. My home state of Oregon has 5. Some of you are from California. You got 53. Wyoming, 1. And there's a total of 435. And representatives serve for 2 years, and they all go up for re-election this November. Senators come from 2 states, or 2 from each state. There's a total of 100. Washington has 2, Oregon has 2, California has 2, Wyoming has 2. Everyone gets 2. And the senators serve 6 years before going up for re-election. And 1/3 of the senators go up for re-election every 2 years. Okay, now I could teach all of those little facts. But what is really important is how I can put those facts together, how I can make sense of this by putting them together and see the relationships. So the day I was teaching about the legislative branch, at the end, I asked this question. This is one student's response. And I asked middle school, based on what you know about the Federal House of Representatives and the Senate, why might the Senate be referred to as the upper chamber? How facts fit together. Now, think of this kind of thinking, which I still need. I'm going to be doing that thinking and working memory, but I need all that knowledge in my permanent memory in order to do this. So, though the number of representatives, 435, is greater than the number of senators, there are a number of reasons that the Senate is referred to as the upper chamber. First, all states are represented equally in the Senate, with 2 senators from each state. As a result, a state with a low population, such as Wyoming and North Dakota, has an equal voice with states having large populations, such as California and Texas. All right. Second, while a representative is meant to represent the people of one region in a state, the senator is meant to represent all people of the state. The senators are prescribed a greater role and responsibility to both their state and their federal government. Another reason that the Senate is referred to as the upper chamber is the stability of the Senate. Instead of serving for only 2 years before going up for re-election, senators serve for 6 years. Also, the election of senators is staggered, with 1/3 of the senators elected every 2 years, avoiding the total turnover that occurs in the House of Representatives every 2 years. Now, I read that and I said, okay, this child, using all of the knowledge that we had, was able to put it together. But sometimes we ask these kind of questions before we have taught this information. And without this knowledge, we cannot process it into higher order thinking. Well, let's go to a term that I often use, cognitive overload. What happens when the level of mental strain becomes too high for the learners? When you don't have enough knowledge to support your working in short-term memory in working memory. Now, I want to use an example here that I observed. And so I was visiting a middle school class, and it was a math class, and the teacher introduced a problem that the students were to work through, but had not been given a great deal of information about how to solve it. And so there was it was a very authentic kind of problem. The students got a architectural diagram of an apartment building or a hotel, one of the two, and it had some measurements, but some measurements missing, and some floors that were going to be carpeted and some that were not. And the children were to determine the number of square yards, square feet actually, of carpeting that should be ordered. And so the teacher just introduced it, struggle away kids, and see if you can figure it out. But as I watched, the students did not know how to figure out the area of even a small square or rectangle. And now they're being asked to do that with a very complex architectural plan. And when I watched them, they didn't know how, if there were two sides on it and the measurements were given for one, how to use that to figure out the other parallel side. And if they had to use more than one measurement to figure out a side, they had no idea. And what I noticed was that very quickly their attentiveness on this project declined, that they began talking to others, texting under the table, going to the restroom, that they were not engaged. But why would you be engaged in something that you didn't have the knowledge to support problem solving in working memory? And it was a perfect example to me of cognitive overload. Mental stress and strain was too high. In the book, he particularly looks at the work by Sweller and colleagues who developed the term cognitive load theory. And it was talking about how when you're working in short-term memory, that some of that short-term memory has to go to move information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And the end result is that solving problems is not the way to learn to solve problems. That you probably need to be taught the information that allows you to do it, and you need to be given worked problems that you go through in order to get to that place. So he goes on to talk about novices. Now, many of us teach novices, and so what about novices? This is the quote. For novices, worked examples where they are taken through the steps of solving a problem by the teacher are more effective than having the students solve problems themselves. So if I am a novice and I don't know about figuring out the area of a space, and it would be much more effective for the teacher say, let's do this first, and probably on a simpler level, and let's do this next, let's do it next, let's do this next, let's do this next. And then, after I've mastered that, and I am much more competent at it, then I could do that exciting problem. And I think humans, we love doing authentic problems. But we have to have some knowledge that would assist us in doing it. So it may not be the authentic problem is a problem. It may simply be the placement in the sequence of instruction. And I think that would be the conclusion of Dylan Wiliam also. This section of the book goes on and talks about this authentic tasks. And so let's just read this together and contemplate it. However, all over the United States, there are calls for students to be involved in more authentic tasks in classrooms, solving real as opposed to contrived problems, learning science concepts by undertaking experiments rather than being formally taught, role-playing events, and so on. Where students already have a great deal of knowledge about the subject at hand, practice in applying this is useful. But if the necessary background knowledge is not present, then investigative or authentic tasks are often ineffective. This is particularly true for practical work in science education. So, putting this together, when I have a problem to solve, I need a great deal of knowledge, and I need to be taught that knowledge and maybe even the steps in solving problems before I do those more authentic problems. Now this, to me, makes total sense based on how our brains work and also what we know about comprehension, the importance of knowledge in order to comprehend what we read or what we hear. It's not the only book recently I've read that came out with this. Hattie's book, 10 Mind Frames for Visible Learning, Teaching for Success, in one chapter, basically came to the same conclusion. And so read along with me. The meta-analyses demonstrate that problem-based learning can indeed have a great impact on student performance if it is implemented at the right time in the learning process. The right time is not while the students are still in the domain of surface understanding, where problem-based learning can even have a negative effect, but once they have reached the domain of deep understanding. In other words, problem-based learning will have an effect only if learners have already acquired the necessary knowledge base to complete tasks at levels of transfer and problem solving. So I look back at the technician that came to work on my washing machine. It was such a beautiful young man. He signed his invoice Ice Cube because he is a chip off the old block, which is his father who originally owned the company. And his ability to solve problems was amazing. But you know, he was telling this story about how he was unable to figure out Maytag washing machines. And so his father sat him down and said, "Son, we're going to spend the whole day on this. And you're going to have to do every bit of it. I'm going to guide you step by step by step by step in order for you to learn this." And so he did that, and he did it another day and another day, but only with step-by-step instruction, getting something in his long-term memory was he able to solve problems. And it was just such a gift to have this young technician explain to me exactly what we were reading about the importance of knowledge and permanent memory in order to support working memory in order to solve problems. And then he loves his work. He's totally joyful about solving my washing machine problem. And I didn't have to get a new washing machine because he said, "This is mechanical, not computer-based. Keep it. Here's some new parts. I have them out in my truck." Everything was well. But it is amazing how the universe gives us more and more examples every time we want to learn something. Well, so what does this mean, though? So this is the background knowledge, a very solid piece. I would love the discussions at a PLC around this chapter in the book. So with that background, two things. What to do: ensure a knowledge-rich curriculum and require every teacher to improve. All right, let's look at the first one, a knowledge-rich curriculum. A knowledge-rich curriculum. And so what to do? The first is to ensure that the curriculum, including whatever textbooks are adopted, is one that is explicitly focused on developing knowledge, because the amount of knowledge in long-term memory determines a student's ability to think. The student's ability to think. The more knowledge is stored in long-term memory, the more effective the use of short-term memory. This does not refer to rote memorization of facts. Rather, it means ensuring that students know is richly connected to other knowledge so that they can solve problems. That young woman who solved the problem of why the Senate is the upper chamber. To be creative through making new connections and have studied areas enough depth to think critically about them. Oh boy, that is packed with information. But here's where he starts. You have to have, if facts are important and how they fit together is important, then you need a properly planned and sequenced curriculum, and it has to occur. Now, here's what I've seen all summer long as I've worked with individual districts. Some districts are defining the curriculum as standards, where we want to be, what are the state standards. And then they tell the teachers, now you get the materials to teach it, how to teach it so we can get to this end goal. So here's the standards, here's where we want students to get, and you get the materials, go to teacher pay teachers, make up your own, get articles off the internet, and get to this place. And I have always said that a teacher needs the tools of their trade to teach well. That if I'm expected to teach systematically reading skills, early decoding skills, phonemic awareness, letter sound associations, decoding of words, I need a curriculum that is more than standards. I need a curriculum that defines not only what I'm teaching, but how I'm teaching it in a very systematic sequence to get there. And that no teacher has the time to develop that at the level that is necessary. And as teachers, we have to, even if we had a really, really good curriculum, such as textbook, a really good textbook, a really good program, we still have to decide, do I need to go forward? Do I need to go back? How am I going to adjust this lesson? How am I going to add active participation? How am I going to tell if the students have learned it? How am I going to do constant formative assessment? I mean, there's so much for us to do. And to not have the tools and have to create the tools. I know you've heard this before, but I love this analogy. You know, it's like saying to a surgeon, tomorrow you have surgery, please weld up a scalpel. We wouldn't expect that. We'd expect that that surgeon has the very, 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 very best tools. Well, those tools include textbooks. And so I am a proponent of having instructional textbooks, and so is Dylan Wiliam. And he makes this statement. It is unlikely that the average teacher could produce better instructional materials each day than the best textbook writers. Now, having written many intervention programs and knowing how many years it took to write a good program, to field test it, to adjust it, to change it, to get better examples, to clarify the wording, I know that without some tools that the quality of my teaching would decline. And so, in fact, people will say, well, the textbook is only as good as the person who delivers it. Well, here is a summary of the research that he reviewed. Textbooks that are more effective on average tend to be more effective for all teachers, irrespective of the teacher's subject knowledge, his or her attitude towards the subject, and the range of achievement in the classes they teach. So, a very good language arts program, which I just worked in the district last week, who did a really superb selection of curriculum for both their new reading program and for their middle school language arts program. And I know that the very best teachers will teach better because they have the tools. I know that the middle performing teachers, in terms of achievement, will do better because they have a tool. And I know teachers who've not consistently had the best results. If they have tools, they are much more likely to make a difference. So I am on the bandwagon for us having instructional programs that are highly sequenced, very well designed, have good examples, good non-examples, clear wording, and repetition and spaced practice so that the students can learn. But we have, again, this phenomena happening across the country. Here are the standards. Teachers, we're not giving you any tools. You know what we have to teach. It's your turn to figure it all out. Use your own materials. Get your own materials. And so I had to chuckle a little bit when I got to this analogy. A collection of teaching resources is no more a curriculum than a pile of bricks is a house. If students are to develop knowledge, what is critical is how one set of materials builds on previous material and builds the foundations for the next. This is why, to paraphrase Mark Twain's reports of the death of textbooks are greatly exaggerated. It was interesting to read about some countries that had moved away from textbooks that returned to textbooks, had moved away to resources on the computer and returned to textbooks because they found that they were able to get better results in terms of academic achievement. So pretty fascinating. And, you know, we have seen this where we want the curriculum aligned to what we want the students to learn, standards. And we want the curriculum to carefully build step by step so that the students have a chance to get there and that it will be very helpful if the material is quite explicit in terms of communicating the information. So isn't that exactly what we would say from the lens of explicit instruction? That it matches the standards, that it builds very carefully, preferably it's a program that's been field tested and adjusted based on feedback from students learning. And it communicates in a very direct way. It just doesn't hope and pray, it gives information explicitly. But then, of course, we'd also want it to have authentic problems to solve, but doing that when the students could be successful because they have enough knowledge in permanent memory to support their working memory. Well, how about the next one, requiring every teacher to improve? You know, I had a wonderful event this spring that reminded me that after 51 years of teaching, I have so much more to add to my repertoire. And it happened at the RTI conference in Oregon, where Kevin Feldman, a good friend, did a keynote. And in the keynote, which was on active participation, which is sort of one of my areas of expertise, he said, you know, when we use partners, we give one partner a job, and we don't often give the other partner a job. He said we need to do both. Ones, tell your partner your answer. Twos, tell them if you disagree or agree and why. Ones, tell your partner how these concepts are the same. Twos, tell how they are different. Ones, tell your partner your answer. Twos, mirror back the answer. And I said to myself, oh my goodness, I have not been consistent on that. I need to ensure that both people in the partnership have something to do. And it just reminded me that this career is one in which every year we can add more to our repertoire that increases the outcomes for our students. And perhaps it's true of every profession, but it's definitely true of teaching that if we are very conscious, very intentional, we are growing all the time. And so after having a knowledge-rich curriculum, Dylan Wiliam suggests that we require every teacher to improve. And how might that happen? Well, we do know It is what we do in the classroom that makes a difference. That, yes, it might make a small difference to have reduced class size. It might be a small difference to have a new building in our school. Certainly it would delight our hearts. But in terms of achievement, basically it is what we do as teachers. And so that the academic progress a child makes depends greatly on the skills of her or his teacher has been concerned over and over again. And I just want to remind us that I don't know if it is the persona of the teacher, but the teaching skills of the teacher that make the difference. Now, you probably know some of the background of Dylan Wiliam in that he is probably the current best expert in the area of formative assessment, and particularly formative assessment that is in the moment. I'm teaching a lesson, write down this answer, show me on your whiteboard. Many kids got it wrong. I adjust my lesson. I go back and reteach it. I give another parallel item. You do that parallel item. I watch it on your whiteboards, and we go forward. So it is in that moment, not necessarily every 2 weeks, but right in that moment, in real time, I'm adjusting my instruction to meet your needs. And that, if I'm using a learning, because that would require I'm focused on learning, I'm focused on your responses during active participation, and I'm adjusting the lesson in that moment based on your needs. That's exactly what the message of explicit instruction is. And so, reading this with me, the most important assessment happens during the instruction. So teacher and students can make adjustments to what they're doing to make the instruction more effective. So it is right there. Write this problem down and solve it, and share it with your partner. Then I monitor around the room, and then I give you feedback. We have so many ways that we can do this, but it's a constant. I am teaching, I'm having you make a response, I'm responding to that response by adjusting my lesson and by giving you feedback. So in it, he talks about this short cycle formative assessment. Number one, ensuring that students know what they're meant to be learning. Okay, that learning intention, that success criteria we give. Then, throughout the lesson, find out what the students have learned, give them feedback that will improve their learning, have them help each other in terms of learning, but also teaching them how to monitor and assess their own learning. So giving them little mini rubrics. So they have written a paragraph, and you have a mini rubric that they can judge their own movement on. Does it have a topic sentence? Does the topic sentence announce what the paragraph is about? Do all the other sentences tell more about the topic sentence? Are transition words used to give flow to the paragraph? Do you have capitalization, punctuation, and spelling? And so I can give you feedback as a teacher on those attributes, but I can teach you to also monitor your own performance in terms of learning. So, number one, having a curriculum that is rich with content and knowledge, systematically organized, that a teacher can move the students through, and the teachers still will have much to do. How to adjust the lesson, what to go back over, how to assess the students, how to keep them attentive, how to manage their behavior while they're teaching, so much to do. Coupled with every teacher, from that evidence from the students' ongoing performance, adjusting their teaching with a focus on learning. Notice how in this short cycle formative assessment, focus on learning, number one, focus on what's been learned, focus on learning, focus on what they learn, focus on learning. And that, not focus on the activity, but focus on learning. Hallelujah, that's right where our attention should go. Well, this was just another example of ways we improve. And so we've talked many times about thinking time, what in the research is called wait time, and we know that from a number of research studies that we should give research 3 to 5 seconds of think time on most questions. And yet, the typical teacher gives, in middle schools, 1 second. And so this is the kind of thing we know, but we have to do consistent doing as we improve as teachers. What we know, are we doing it so that we can improve? Well, as we wrap this up, I read many reviews of the book, of this book that's in my library, and I just have to say that I totally agree with this English woman. William's vision of schools, where all pupils follow a challenging, content-rich curriculum, and all teachers are given time and support to hone their craft, is a compelling one. So, Nick, were there any questions that I should respond to?
Let's see. We haven't gotten any yet, but if you guys have a question for Anita, please send it in the chat.
Navi. It's on my screen. Many schools.
So if you see one.
What?
If you see a question, yes, feel free to answer it, Anita.
So many schools are now using computer-based program as their intervention. Does William discuss research on the use of computer-based programs? It would be useful to have this information as I work with schools. Now, in the book, Anne, he talks about use of computers where the goal was not as an intervention, but to teach specific knowledge. Even, for example, having a textbook in a text versus on the computer. And there were some studies that found that the textbooks actually led to more learning because you actually had to use so much of your short-term memory, your working memory, to process and find information, scrolling back, going forward, and so forth, versus if you have a textbook, you could more easily find it. But specifically this question he did not answer. But you might want to look at the book that came out, I think, 2 weeks ago, Mary Ann Wolf's new book on computers, and she is always excellent in terms of review of research. So, if we have no more questions, then I will just say this. Let me see if we have. My school is planning on having RTI pushed into my classroom during a block time when mainstream kids are there as well. Do we have any more part of that answer? Any ideas? My school is planning on having RTI pushed into my classroom during a block time when mainstream kids are there as well. I'm not sure, Chris, but if you email me at archerteach@AOL.com and I can get some more information. So where instruction occurs, whether it is in a general ed classroom or in the hallway or in a special ed classroom, probably is not as critical as the quality of instruction within that time. And so the amount of time leads to academic learning time and the quality of instruction. Do we have an objective? Do we have demonstration? Do we have guided practice? Do we have feedback? All of those attributes of explicit instruction. But you email me a little more information and we'll discuss it. So let me just tell you about our next webinar. And this came as a question at 3 of the different TOTs I did this summer. And that was, what kind of planning should we do? Should we have a lesson plan form that everybody fills in? And my feeling is that we might have to do this in a little bit different way, on a continuum from if you have very explicit materials to you have no curriculum and you just have a standard. Then the amount of planning differs, the intensity of the planning differs. So I think this is going to be a really interesting, I'm really working on it even though it's still a few months away, on lesson planning across different curriculum and how one method does not fit all curriculum for lesson planning. Pretty exciting. Lesson planning, yeah, all right. Any other questions? Okay, and Chris, I'm going to get more information from you. Nick, thank you so much. Thank all of you, and may you have the best school year ever. I'm planning on it. I already had someone email me say, Anita, you look different. Yes, I went from black hair, long black hair, to silver. Definitely not gray hair, silver hair. So yes, I do look a little bit different, but my energy is the same, my enthusiasm is the same, and my passion for you as teachers, because I know that the thing that makes the most difference is what we do every day in classes with children. So bless your year and bless our children. Teach with passion, manage with compassion. Thanks so very much.
Thank you, everyone.
See you again.